Hi, welcome to today's video. My name's Paul. So today I was going to look at post-impressionism. You know, in subjects like science and history, including art history, we like to put, and when I say we, I mean human beings, like to put labels on things, to categorize things, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's a way of taking a very large, complicated subject and breaking it down into smaller, maybe more manageable chunks. But some of the labels that we put on things sometimes are maybe a little bit misleading. So in this case, what we're looking at is a painting by a painter called Paul Henry. And he's often classed as a post-impressionist painter. I don't like that label because I'm not sure exactly what it means. Post-impressionism was not a specific art style. It was just a label that was applied to specifically four artists, originally four artists. And the only thing that those artists really had in common was they shared a sort of location and a time period. The location was France, and the time period was sort of the second half of the 19th century. Maybe they all had some roots within Impressionism, perhaps, but other than that, they really didn't share a similar style. But as I say, Paul Henry is classed as a post-impressionist, and I'm not sure what that means. In this video, we're going to look at some of the artists who were originally classed as post-impressionist, and I'm also going to be doing a bit of sketching. I don't have any watercolor painting to share this week, but I did do some sketching. The sketching was inspired by this guy, Paul Henry. Paul Henry, maybe I share two things in common with him, same first name, and also born in the same city in Belfast in Ireland. When he was a young man, after school, after college, Paul Henry went to Paris, where he studied art. He stayed there for a few years, and he studied in a few different art academies, including one which was set up by the American artist Whistler in Paris. When he returned to Ireland, he moved to the west coast, specifically to an island called Achill Island, which is off the coast of County Mayo. Now, Ireland itself is on, if you like, the outskirts of Europe, and Achill Island is on the outskirts of Ireland. So this would have been a pretty remote place when he went there, probably in the 1910s or so, 1920s. There would not have been much in the way of technology. The people who lived there often lived in houses like you can see in the painting, stone cottages with thatch roofs. They might look very quaint, but if you've ever been inside one, you know that they're freezing cold. They're very little insulation. They're damp, very, very damp inside. It would not have been a comfortable life. And these people who lived there lived in pretty much abject poverty. It would not have been an easy life, as I say. But anyway, Paul Henry went there. He painted mostly landscapes, a few sort of seascapes, and occasionally he painted some of the local people, but mostly landscapes. To get back to the idea of post-impressionism, as I say, I don't really understand why Paul Henry is classed as a post-impressionist, because I'm not sure that post-impressionist was actually a well-defined style of painting. If you look at the four examples on the screen, these are by the four original post-impressionist painters, or at least the four original painters who were classed as post-impressionists. So they are from sort of top left, Gogh, top right is Cezanne, below that is Seurat, and then the bottom left is Van Gogh. And you can see their painting styles are all quite different. Maybe the only thing they have in common, maybe a bit of a link back to Impressionism, is the use of colour, lots of bright colours. But other than that, there was no definite post-impressionist style. These artists, if you start with Seurat in the bottom right, the painting that I chose to show you as an example is maybe not the style that he's best remembered for. As I say, we didn't get a chance to see what Seurat was really capable of because he died so young. But this example, this is probably closer to Impressionist style. And when he was starting out as a young man, Impressionism was really at its height, so he was probably influenced, at least to some extent, by Impressionism. He went on to develop a style of painting that is often classed as Neo-Impressionism, sometimes also called Pointillism, sometimes also called Divisionism, and there's a few other names for it as well. But basically, what he did was he made up paintings of tiny little dots of pure colour. And these dots are so close together that when you step back from the painting, your eyes can't resolve the individual dots. They all sort of merge together to form a painting. But he didn't start out as that. That style developed over about 10 years or so. Seurat, as I say, he died very young. It was a very sudden death as well. Nobody knows exactly the cause of death. Some people say it might have been pneumonia, meningitis, a few other things. But anyway, it was a short, severe illness, and then he died. His wife, partner, I'm not sure exactly if they were married, she had a pretty rough time of it. Obviously her husband dying, but also within 2 weeks of her husband dying, their eldest son also died, again of a sudden illness. And during all of this, she was pregnant with their second child, who unfortunately also died either during childbirth or soon after it. Her name was Madeleine. I don't know what happened to Madeleine, but it was obviously a very difficult time in her life to lose 2 children and a husband within a few months. The next guy, Cezanne. Cezanne was very much ridiculed and put down by a lot of art critics during his life. Now, I am no fan, I admit this, I am absolutely no fan of art critics. I'm not sure what they contribute, and when I look at the history of art, I think they often fail to recognize the importance of artists and the talent of certain artists. So, as I said, the art critics dismissed Cezanne as being a waste of time, pointless. They described him as a weirdo and things like this. But some of the younger artists, the sort of up-and-coming artists, the guys who would go on to become some of the best-known artists in the 20th century with modernism and cubism things, so people like Matisse and Picasso, they were huge fans of Cezanne. Picasso described him as a kind of father figure for modernist painting. So, like I say, the art critics dismissed him, but I think they sort of missed how important and how influential Cezanne really was. Of course, future art critics can look back and say, oh yes, we can see how important he was, but at the time the art critics failed to recognize his importance. Another painter who was overlooked by the art critics or even dismissed in a somewhat arrogant way was Van Gogh. Van Gogh went on, of course, to influence many, many painters. Van Gogh is often described as one of the greatest colorists of all time. But again, during his lifetime, he was dismissed as a madman. His art was described as irrelevant and unimportant. These days, if you wanted to buy a piece of Van Gogh art, of course, you would have to have a very, very healthy bank account. So again, another case where the art critics of the time completely failed to recognize how important the artist was. Again, unfortunately, we didn't get a chance to really find out what Van Gogh was fully capable of. Maybe we sometimes forget that he died also at a very young age, because he painted so many paintings. Think of how many more paintings he would have produced if he had lived to, say, 60 or 70 years old. Again, he died when he was only 37, and unfortunately in that case it was suicide, of course. I remember watching a YouTube video, their husband and wife team, artists, and they described Van Gogh as just a lonely man. I think it was more than just loneliness. I think Van Gogh suffered from mental health problems for most of his life, certainly his adult life, including depression and psychotic episodes and various different mental health issues. These days, people with mental health issues don't always get the help that they need. Back in the 19th century, I doubt that many people really got the help that they needed. Van Gogh was lucky to some extent. He went to an asylum where they basically gave him a degree of freedom. He was allowed to continue painting and things, and he made a slight recovery, perhaps, at least in his physical health. He wasn't the only artist with this problem, but he was a very heavy drinker, and his physical health wasn't very good. But as I say, imagine if Van Gogh had lived until he was in his 60s or 70s, how many more paintings might he have been able to produce? So again, we'll never fully know what he was really capable of. The last of the four artists who were originally described as post-impressionists then was Gauguin. Now, Gauguin is quite often seen as a controversial figure. And I don't want to go into all of the stories about him because I want to keep this a reasonably family-friendly sort of YouTube channel. But one of the controversies around him, I think, is incorrect, so maybe putting the story right. It's said that he abandoned his wife and children. That's not entirely true. It's partly true, but it's not the full facts. So, without going into a complete description of his life, he had a very colourful life. Gauguin met his wife. She was Danish, but she was living in Paris. She was, I think, a teacher, maybe a music teacher. Anyway, they met and got married, and I think they had 4 or 5 children. Now, at that time, when they met and got married, Gauguin was not an artist. He was working as some kind of bookkeeper or accountant, something like that. And he had a regular job. He had money coming in. He also invested in the stock exchange and things, so he wasn't super rich, but he certainly wasn't poor. Then in the early 1860s, the Paris stock market collapsed, and there was a major recession, and a lot of people lost jobs and things. Gauguin was one of them. So he went from having a regular income and things to being financially less secure. And at some point, his wife decided to move back to Copenhagen, to her parents' house. I think her parents were quite wealthy and were able to find room for all of these people, all of these 4 or 5 children as well. So she went back to Copenhagen. He followed her, and to be honest, he never really fitted in Copenhagen. He did try to sort of be an entrepreneur and start up his own business. That failed. Apart from anything else, he had problems because he couldn't speak Danish, and so that was obviously a huge disadvantage. Anyway, it didn't work out, and at some point his wife, I guess, just got fed up with him or whatever. He had also started getting into art, and he wanted to make art his full-time career. I guess that she just lost patience with him and said, yeah, basically clear off, go away, go back to Paris or whatever. I don't want you here anymore. So the stories that Gauguin abandoned his family, it's not entirely true. It was his wife who said, go away, basically. She may have had good reason to say that to him, but to say that it was all Gauguin's fault is, I think, not entirely true. Anyway, Gauguin went on to sort of travel many different places. He ended up in Central America for a while, in the Caribbean, the Pacific, places like Tahiti. And then some of the other stories about him started to emerge. He died quite young. He was about 54 when he died. And again, therefore we didn't get a chance to see exactly what he was fully capable of. Well, okay, if you made it this far, thank you for listening to me ramble on about post-impressionism and some of these artists. As I say, only did some sketching this week. This is one of them. I may take some of these sketches and turn them into watercolor paintings if I have a chance. But for now, they're just sketches. So again, thank you for watching the video, listening to me, and hopefully see you in the next video.